gradients in Photoshop. So a gradient is a blend of colors used to fill a selection of a layer or an entire layer itself. So there are two pieces that are primary tools for this. Number one being my gradient tool, and the gradient tool is along with the paint bucket tool, 3D material drop. So it's at the top of the stack, so you should be able to find your gradient tool. When I click the gradient tool, up at the top, my options bar here changes to my gradient options. And so there I see a gradient editor that I can go into. I see some presets. If I click, you can go ahead and click on the little gear icon to open up additional gradients. So then you can see I can quickly select one of these if I so desire. I have different types of gradients as well. Those being a linear gradient, which is the first in the list. And the linear gradient basically allows me to drag in a linear fashion, and I can drag however I want in whatever angle. If I drag small, my gradient fills a small area. If I drag large, it fills a much larger. And I actually can drag outside of my document. If you can see, I'm over in my layers. Now I'm up in my color. And so that gradient starts here and it ends somewhere actually over here on the right side of my interface. And I am seeing only what's visible in my window or my document. The radial gradient is the next one, and this one radiates out from the center. So again, I can draw small and make very tiny, or I can drag large. And if I drag large, you can kind of see how it does an circular, kind of concentric circles here with my color blend. The next one is the angle, and this one's a little unique in the fact that I click and drag and I sort of create an angle that then swoops around. So if I click and drag, it swoops around. And so my starting color is here, my ending color is here, and my gradiated blends of color go around. The next is a reflective. The reflected is a nice way to create what would appear to be like pipes or wires. If I drag small, I get smaller areas, larger. So you can kind of get an interesting effect with those. The next here is the starburst, and that allows me to again draw kind of like a radial, but it's going to burst out in a more angled, pointed fashion. So the way that these will look will depend on my mode. The other thing that happens here, when I click and drag at this point, I have solid colors, white to black. This one actually is going off of, we have some foreground and some default black and white. Now, if I were to change this to transparent, and now I clicked and I'm in the gradient editor, let's just click OK. Do you see how now I have a gradient that leads to transparency? And I'll show you how we can play with the gradients here in a moment. But when I do the transparency, it sort of compounds it and it doesn't fully erase it like I did before. So now, eventually I could fill this whole thing in. So if I have a black to white or two solid colors, it fills it in. With a gradient, I'm able to do some interesting effects. And you can see how that, kind of multitasking here all in one layer. Okay. So let me go and we'll start over here. Let's click and open up my gradient editor. So in my gradient editor, I can create a new gradient. I can modify an existing gradient. So I can create new, I can load gradients. I can do a lot of fun things here. Let's just look at this gradient from red to green. So I have what's called my stops, my color stops, and those are at the bottom. When I click on it, you notice the little triangle at the top. It looks like the roof of the house darkens, and so I know that I'm on that color stop. And so here I can change to either predefine my foreground background, or if I click, I end up with my color picker, which then gives me all of my options in whatever color mode I'd like to mix. I have my spectrum here, and I can choose whatever sort of color area that I'd like. And if I click OK, you can see that that has changed. The top boxes control opacity. So this is where I can get something to be transparent if I would like. So I have one for each of those color stops. I can add more in. Say I want this area here to get fairly transparent in the middle. You can see how I start seeing the checkerboard indicating transparency. And I also can click down and add color stops. And to my knowledge, you don't really have a limit of how many color stops you add. When you initially are adding them within a gradient, it just takes the color that's right above it at that point. But again, you can double click and choose a new color there. If I've added too many, want to simplify, I click and just drag down and they will go away. So I can easily remove and add color stops and transparency stops. All right, the diamond indicates the midpoint. So let's get rid of this. And so you can see this traditional. When I click on either of the stops, I get a diamond. That diamond location actually is at 50%, meaning that at this 50% point, I've got the perfect mix of yellow and green. If I change it, at 70% is where, and this is 70% of my linear gradient, this is where it's my pretty much 50-50 point of blending, if that makes sense. So I can change the location of where my midpoint for blending would be. If I click OK, the gradient I just created is here, and I can click and drag. So that's how you can control gradients in Photoshop.